on behalf of the Social Justice Ministry, our elders, for offering those reflections to us tonight. We offer reverence to our ancestors and to our elders for providing us with the qualities of composure, respect, patience, caution, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. We honor and lift the intentions offered into these libations. We thank the elders that spoke tonight for reminding us that voting is not an option, it is a sacred tradition. May we move forward embodying each of these qualities, being moved by them as we take part in our ancestral responsibility. Before we move on to the next part of our program, I would just like to make a little disclaimer. We're running a little bit late tonight, but we thought that it was important to draw out all of these intentions to hear from everybody, the depth of the meaning of the sacred act of voting tonight. So we might run a little bit past our 8 o'clock stopping time, but we pray for your patience and your understanding. I am filled with pride right now to introduce you to the guides of our next segment. Jill Bates Moore and Alicia Holland are two longtime friends who jointly operate the woman-owned law firm Dahlia Law Group based in Oakland. Beyond that, they are simply two people who I hope to be when I grow up. They will spend the next part of our program offering their legal expertise and guiding us through the major propositions on the ballot this November. Jill and Alicia, thank you for joining us tonight.
Okay, I was just unmuting myself. Hi, family. How are y'all? Hey, I appreciate that wave. Alicia is here, and I think she is unmuting as we speak.
I am.
There we go.
Good evening.
There we go. So thanks you all for having us. Thank you for allowing us into your homes this evening for a little bit of an overview of these ballot measures. I am rising to the microphone to take on my part of the duty. Alicia did such a great job with organizing the ballot measures and getting us ready for tonight. So we want to have some equity in our division of labor here. So I am going to kind of orient you to how we are going to approach the ballot measures and what we are going to be, and what we're going to be talking about, what we'll actually cover. So there are 12. Yes, there are 12 state ballot measures, and I believe there are an additional 3 county measures. There are 2 for Alameda County, and there's 1 for Contra Costa County. Alicia, did I get that right?
You did.
Okay, so we are going to review those, and we are going to review them in a particular way. We are going to ask 4 questions. 1 is, what is it? Is it a constitutional amendment? Is it, who put it on the ballot? We're going to do that. Then we're going to cover, what does it say? Right? If it's asking us a question, we're going to present that question so that we can engage with it. If it is asking us to consider some points, then we're going to present those points in a summary way so that we can engage with those points. The next thing that we'll ask, so this is the 3rd of the 4 bullets, if you're tracking, and don't worry, there's a PowerPoint. So we're going to be able to, I'll share my screen in just a minute and get the PowerPoint up, but I wanted to go over this first. The 3rd of the 4 bullets is going to be some things to think about, right? Is there some context here that is important to talk about? Is there some below the line information or maybe some other information that maybe you need to bring to mind in order to inform your next set of questions before you decide how you're going to vote? And then the 4th of the 4 bullets is going to be resources. Some of these things, as you can imagine, are pretty robust, right? There are multiple different agendas represented. There's a lot of money on some of these that has been spent. There's plenty of noise in the for and against columns. So we want to make sure that, and of course, our ability to sort of overview these tonight is limited by time. Now, Alicia and I nerd out on this kind of stuff, and so we could talk to you about this stuff all night. But I assure you that there's somebody in your household who ain't having that, and it might be you. So, so there are resources for every state ballot measure. You are going to have a link directly to the Voters Edge page that covers all of the information about that ballot measure, including the actual text of the ballot measure, so you can see for yourself what it says, who spent what, who sponsored what, who said what, who shot John, all of it. Okay, so that'll be there. And then we've also included some slides that have additional resources at the end of the slide presentation. There's some additional resources. One of those resources is a link to the League of Women Voters, who has already scheduled multiple pro-con sessions that will do a deeper dive on some of these ballot measures. I know the Palo Alto chapter did schedule one. I think Santa Clara County has one scheduled as well. So links so that you can get that information if you want further review. All of those are being done on Zoom because COVID. So, so that information is there. And then there are some defined terms, because some things require some definition, right? Like, what is a legislative constitutional amendment? How is that different from an initiative constitutional amendment, right? So some of those, a few of those definitions we've included as well. Does everybody have what they need in order for us to get started? If you do, give me a high sign. I love y'all. My family waving at me. I love y'all so much. Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna hop on this screen share and we will get started. I'll cover the introduction, just a little bit about us, and then Alicia's gonna cover the evens and the counties, and I will cover the odds and the closure. All right, here we go. And let me see if I can actually get this in presentation mode. If you can see that presentation, wave at me. Perfect. All right, so off to the races. This is who we are. We didn't know if our cameras would be on or not, and we don't assume that we know everybody or that everybody knows us, so we dropped a couple pictures in there. For those of you who we don't know, it is nice to meet you. Who are we? Dahlia Law Group, as Brother Marcel said, thank you so much, is a Black, because we Black, mama's Black, daddy Black, everybody Black. Black woman-owned law practice in Oakland. We focus on legacy and estate planning, probate, and litigation related to those areas. Why that work? The reason we choose this work is because we see ourselves and we see you in the future, and we deserve to have a legacy there to meet us. Why this conversation tonight? Because informed voting is a legacy issue. That's why we're here. So, whoops. These are all of the ballot measures. Don't worry about the busyness of this slide. The reason these colors appear like this is because these are actually active links to the slides in the presentation where these measures are covered. We will make this presentation available to Imani to share it as they deem fit. So you will, I'm assuming that you will have access to this, but just don't get freaked out by the color situation. There was no rhyme or reason to that. Similar here. All right, Proposition 14 is the first one that we are going to cover, and because this is an even, Alicia is going to take it from here.
Yay, thank you, Jill. So as you can already see, Jill is our technology wizard. So that's why she didn't let me touch the buttons, but we're all safer that way. So starting out on Proposition 14, this measure is around stem cell research, and something in particular that you'll see coming up as a theme in quite a few of these propositions that we are going to talk about tonight is something that Jill mentioned, with voting being a legacy issue. Many of these are things that you have already seen something about this measure on a prior ballot, and it's back again because somebody either didn't like it or wants to expand it. This is one of those measures. So the stem cell research measure that is Proposition 14 is a bond measure. And what a bond is it is a way that the state can sell something to get money now that they will have to repay later. This one was placed on the ballot by petition signatures. And what they are asking for is to authorize the state to sell $5.5 billion in bonds to fund stem cell and other medical research, including training, research facility construction, administrative costs, and it is earmarked for all manner of stem cell research, but they have a dedicated $1.5 billion carve-out specifically for brain-related diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. Then with this money, what there will be is there's going to be a repayment portion, and it expands the programs that are already in place. So some of the things that to consider on this one is that these bonds are an extension of funding that was already put in place in 2004. In 2004, through Prop 71, there was approval for stem cell research that allowed for $3 billion in funding. At this point, they are down to a couple $100,000 worth of funding that remains in that $3 billion allocation. And so that's where this measure is coming in to sell that additional $5.5 billion. And what the repayment term on that would be we're going to need to repay the 5.5, and then it covers 2.3 billion in additional interest for those bonds. Another thing that is important to note, and as you're doing your own research and looking some of these things up, you're going to see reference to an acronym that is CIRM. And what CIRM is, the California Institute of Research and Management, and that is a particular institute that has the oversight capacity for overseeing how all of this, first the $3 billion and now the additional $5.5 billion would be spent, as well as how it would be allocated. And so some of the conversation around it has been around the accountability, the transparency for that money, and some folks that take issue with how that money was spent and what they can see about it. So you see the resources are there where you'll be able to see, just for the interest of time, I'm not going to take you through the money side of it, but this one has a lot more money in the yes column than it does on the no column. And so with those resources, if you're interested in seeing who's putting all the money and backing in, which can give you some insights on it, then you can see the breakdown for who the major funders are for this one.
It would probably help if I came off the mute. Sorry, y'all. There's a running joke in our work that Jill does not know how to operate the mute button because I get it wrong way more times than I get it right. This is Proposition 15. This one, I want to sit down for a second and let's just work with it. Proposition 15 has to do with taxes on commercial property. This is going to relate to what some of you who are property owners already know of as Proposition 13. Proposition 13 has to do with how properties are reassessed when a property changes hands. Okay, we aren't going to have enough bandwidth tonight to go through all the ins and outs of Proposition 13, but do not worry, I have not left you hanging. Alicia has not left you hanging. We have resources for you. First, let's focus here. Proposition 15, 1-5. It is an initiative constitutional amendment. What that means is that this measure will change the California state constitution It is not just a statute that's, that's in the California code books. This actually modifies the Constitution of the state of California. It was put on the ballot using the initiative process, which is a process where voters can collect signatures. I think it's 8%, it's in the definitions. The voters can collect signatures in order to get a proposed law on the ballot without going through the elected lawmakers in the California legislature. Okay, and without going through the governor's office. This is the people's ability to go straight to the ballot, and it would modify the Constitution. Here's what it says. It asks the question whether the Constitution should be amended to require most commercial and industrial properties to be reassessed for property tax purposes on a regular basis instead of being assessed based on the purchase price when a property is sold. That's a mouthful. First, commercial and industrial properties are businesses, shopping centers, that sort of thing. It's not the types of properties where people live. It's not residential properties. Then, the way that properties are typically assessed is when the property is sold. For commercial properties, and I think I've started to go into oh no, I haven't. So for commercial properties, I'm actually going to go back so that you don't, whoops. Ha, I learned how to go back. So for commercial properties, typically the assessment where the property taxes are based is made when the property is sold. Commercial properties typically aren't sold as frequently as residential properties, right? But commercial properties tend to have, tend to be intended to have a stable use. So one of the things that is relevant here is how much tax revenue, right, can be generated from property taxes on commercial properties. There's only so much of a percentage. There's a cap on how much property tax can be increased on any property in the state of California from year to year. And these assessments are not done. Assessments on commercial and industrial properties are not done except for when the property is sold. So, some things to consider. One of the things to consider that's actually not on this list, so I'm going to lead with it because there was really no way to get it into a bullet point, is that a way of passing and protecting wealth in the state of California has to do with transferring property when somebody dies. Typically, and we'll see this again when we get to Proposition 19, typically when somebody dies, they can, depending on their relationship, if they're transferring property to a child or to a parent, sometimes to a grandparent, there are special rules about that, then the property taxes can be kept low based on the property tax rates or the assessed values of the property that were in place when the person who died passed away. So one of the ways that commercial property sort of falls into that is people use laws like Proposition 13, which I mentioned earlier, and Proposition 58, which is another one, excuse me, to transfer property within family and to pull them in and out of business entities. Okay, so that the property tax bases are kept low. That's a consideration. That's not a bad thing necessarily, right? It is something for you to know, right, as you are considering how to inform your vote and what questions to ask as you're deciding whether you want to vote for or against this. Some other things to consider here are, one, that a business is exempt from this measure completely if all of the property it owns has a total fair market value of $3 million or less. So that's aimed at sort of small dollar value property owners. I know if somebody handed me $3 million, I could give it a job. So I don't consider that to be small in my life, but that's where we are with this. Another thing that you will see come up as you are doing further review on this one is the impact to small business owners who rent space in commercial buildings, because small business owners because commercial leases are frequently done on what's called a triple net basis. A triple net lease is a type of commercial lease that requires the renter to pay not only what we think of as rent, right? So just like a base rent amount. This is what it costs for me to rent the space. They pay that base rent, plus they pay amounts for property operating expenses like utilities, like insurance, like maintenance, like taxes, right? And so one of the things that you will hear as you're considering this and you'll read is people arguing about the potential impact to small business owners based on the fact that these triple net leases exist, and some of this tax burden is going to be is anticipated to be passed down to the renters. This one, I will grant you, this one's pretty loaded. We could actually have a whole conversation about this one and Prop 19 on their own. So here's what we've done. There is the Voter's Edge, like the complete resource page is there, as I promised you it would be for each of these, and it will. But also the property tax assessment laws for the state of California, including Prop 13, which you heard me mention, and also Prop 58, which I think you also heard me mention. There are some really summary resources that I believe, and Alicia believes, are very helpful to this. One of them is to understanding these. One of them is a 3-minute video, and we've linked to that here. And also there is an FAQ that the California BOE has put together that is also very helpful, and it's built around questions. So you can scroll through that for a better understanding. This one, I would say, this is probably one of those ones that you're going to have to spend some time with to actually decide where you land on this one. Yeah, because when we start talking about changing property tax assessments, this is the sort of thing that causes people's blood to boil, and folks who don't feel strongly about anything feel strongly about these sorts of things. So, okay, I'm going to move on to Prop 16.
So Prop 16 is another one that is a revisit of something that you've already seen before. So this is a constitutional amendment. So again, similar to the one we just looked at that Jill mentioned, this is actually amending the California state constitution. This one is getting there a little bit differently. I'm going to try to present this to you as neutrally as possible, but I warn you that these kind of annoy Jill and I, which these are legislatively referred constitutional amendments, which means that the legislature basically punted on this to say, we are not willing to take a vote and do this as our job as elected officials. So instead, we're going to put it on the ballot and make the people vote and decide. The same people who sent us here to actually do a job. I tried to do it neutral, but I warned you beforehand that I probably wasn't going to be very good at that. So it requires a majority approval, and what they are asking for is to allow diversity to be used as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. Now, the revisit of what you are looking at here is from Prop 209. And so Prop 209, which was passed back in 1996, was allowing voters past that to essentially end the use of affirmative action within California decision making. And so with Prop 16 that's now on the ballot, what that would do is remove that ban that was placed by Prop 209 to allow certain conditions to be used. Jill, you can change the slide for our points here. So what this section would do is it would allow consideration of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in each of those hiring decisions. What it would also allow is for state agencies and institutions to enact programs if they wanted to have some sort of affirmative action criteria that they wanted to use to increase diversity or to help certain groups with either bidding on public contracts, admission to schools, or other public settings that they're dealing with in hiring as well. So this is another one where there's a whole bunch of money involved, and there's a lot more of it on the yes side than there is the no side of it. And again, you can take a look and see who the folks are that are involved in it. The other thing that's of note that you will see when you're looking at your individual things for some of these is this is one of those that doesn't have any direct effect on state money. Once it's administered on a state level process, there's no budget impact. However, there could be an impact within a particular agency depending on what programming they decide to put in place and the cost for administering that programming. And so with that, on to 17.
All right, Proposition 17 is about voting rights for people on parole. This is a rights restoration measure. It is a constitutional amendment. It is the same type of legislative constitutional amendment that Alicia just described. So it was put on the ballot by the legislature. And this asks whether people on parole, who are on parole in California, should be allowed to register and to vote in elections. Let's talk about it. Some things to consider here are, one, first of all, what does parole even mean? Because I don't think that it's safe to assume that everybody knows that. Parole, a person on parole has served some measure of time in a California state prison. That's the only time that parole is even relevant. That person has been conditionally released from prison to complete some other requirements. Now, some other requirements could be just the general requirements of parole, which we have put a link to down in this second bullet in resources. You'll see there that people who are on parole are subject to a huge amount of supervision. They must obey all laws, including paying taxes. The supervision is extensive. There are travel restrictions, all kinds of things. So, but one thing to know is that sometimes a person can be on parole. They can have served all of the time that they were sentenced to serve, but they can be on parole just because there are some financial requirements that they need to meet. Sometimes when a person is convicted of convicted of a crime, there are criminal restitution payments that are ordered, and sometimes parole is ordered even when it's just those financial obligations that exist. Right now, people who are on parole or who are currently imprisoned in the state of California are not able to register to vote, and they are not able to vote. This would amend the California state constitution to invest or to revest that right into people. So resources are here below. And I don't think that we included the definition of parole and parole versus probation and that sort of thing in the resources in this slide deck, but you are going to see some of that in this link that we have here. All right, Proposition 18.
So Proposition 18 is another constitutional amendment. It is also legislatively referred. And this proposition would amend the Constitution to allow 17-year-olds to vote in primary and special elections that are occurring just before their 18th birthday. So the way that the law is currently set up, that when a young person is 17 years old, if they are going to be 18 by the time of the general election, then they can go ahead and pre-register, and they would be allowed to vote in that general election that happens after they have turned 18. With this amendment, what it would do is it would change that slightly so that whatever elections that are happening in preparation for that particular general election, they would be allowed to essentially vote early. So as a 17-year-old, thinking about this election that we have coming up on November 3rd, if this law were currently in place, what this would have allowed was anyone who was 17 that would be 18 by the time of November 3rd would have been allowed to vote in the March primary that we had. Additionally, if from those primary elections a special election was required, then they would have also been allowed to vote in that special election. This is another one where there is not much of a direct impact to the state other than the process of setting up the voter registration for pre-registration. So that's going to be a one-time fee that it would cost the state to do that. And then there's a potential cost for each election that has to do with the fact that it could cause more ballots being cast. And so just the additional cost for administering those additional ballots that are in place. This one is one where there really isn't a lot of money that's at play here. Most of the folks that are in favor of it are organizations that are unions, education, and professional associations that have to do with, frankly, kind of the way it reads are the folks that tend to benefit from better turnout when it comes to primaries and special elections are going to be the folks that are in favor, and the no's are primarily the newspapers and some other folks that prefer lower turnout in elections who I will tell you that reading some of this stuff, you just kind of see some of the absurdity in some of the things that people try to present to us, because one of the large no positions was that 17-year-olds aren't old enough to vote, even though we are talking about what could essentially be the matter of, I went to sleep at 17 and I woke up tomorrow at 18, but somehow something changed overnight, where now all of a sudden I have gained all of my wisdom. So that's what this one is about. So I will get off my soapbox and we will move to 19.
All right, Proposition 19. This one is another one about property taxes. And yes, we said that we were going to have 2 slides per proposition. This one was a bit more dense, and so I was that annoying person who puts all of the words on the PowerPoint. I know we all hate that person. I'm that person tonight. It's all right. Hate me now, love me later. What is this? This is another legislative constitutional amendment put on the ballot by the California legislature. And this one deals with carrying that property tax assessment, that assessment value that allows for property taxes to be lower. This one involves carrying that around with you, around the state. This allows eligible homeowners, so people who are 55 or older, folks who might be severely disabled, there are some other requirements, to do some very important things here, important for you to consider. 1, it allows them to use the assessed value of their property, that's the value that's used to determine property taxes, of their current home, to use that value when they buy a new home that is more expensive anywhere else in the state. And they get to do that up to 3 times during their lifetime. This proposition would also eliminate the transfer of that assessed value. And remember, the assessed value is the value that is used to determine property taxes. So in a market where the property values are constantly climbing, like most of the time in California, then the assessed value that's earlier in time tends to be lower. right? So this would eliminate the transfer of that assessed value for inherited properties unless the property is a farm or the heir's principal residence. An heir is a person who inherits something, okay? That can also be a beneficiary of a trust. And just think of this word heir as somebody who gets something when somebody else dies. An owner-occupied inherited property that has, I'm gonna read this and then I'm gonna explain it. So just stick with me for a second. An owner-occupied inherited property that has a market value that differs from the assessed value by more than $1 million will be reassessed starting in February 2023. Here's what this is about. When I die, if I had a child, my child would be able to take the assessed value of my property and have their property taxes based on that if I left my property to my child, okay? What this says is we're not doing that. We're just not gonna do that, all right? Unless my child lives in that property. That is their primary residence. If this is just some property that they're renting out or, you know, or whatever, if they don't live there, then they will go ahead and the property will be reassessed and the property taxes will likely go up. Same is true if it's a farm. If it's a farm that's being transferred, then this law does not apply to that. Even properties that are owner occupied, even inherited properties that are owner occupied. So in the example that I just gave, my child is actually living in the house, okay? In that situation, the property will still be reassessed and the property tax is likely to go up if the difference in the market value of that property is $1 million or more from the assessed value of that property. The briefest of primers on how the assessed value and the market value can be different is this. When a property is assessed for tax purposes, the assessment can only go up so much every single year. So it doesn't keep track with the fair market value. Okay, the assessed value for property tax purposes is always going to be lower than the fair market value, except for when the thing is sold. So if my property that I left my kid that they're living in and I'm dead has appreciated in value so much that it is more than $1 million difference than that property tax assessment value, then that property is getting reassessed so that those property taxes will go up. If that part made sense to you, give me a hand wave. Okay, I see some hands waving. All right, perfect. All right, this will still allow for a once in a lifetime transfer of the assessed value, which is what that property tax is based on, of a home of somebody that was destroyed by a wildfire or a natural disaster. The logic there is that if I was fine staying in my home until the wildfire burned it down. I actually didn't have any, I was forced to get a different home. And so maybe the property tax change because the value of the new place that I'm going to buy is higher. Maybe that would be a penalty to me. That was the logic for putting this provision in here. I don't know if that's persuasive to you or not, right? Like that's one of the things you'll have to consider as you are informing your vote. The increased revenue from this, because all of this is about increasing the property taxes under certain circumstances, the increased revenue is going to be used for a statewide fire suppression fund. All right. We've already talked about the special considerations here. I went through those sort of in that example with me being dead and my kid inheriting my property. the 3-minute video and the FAQ that sort of goes over in a bit more detail the property tax assessment rules for the state are dropped here as well. All right, Proposition 20.
There we go. Proposition 20 is around making some changes to criminal penalties and parole access for certain crimes. And so what's happening here is this is an initiative statute, so not a constitutional amendment, but just a law that would be in the civil codes and the criminal codes for the state of California. It was placed on the ballot through petition signatures. And what it would do is restrict the ability to be granted parole for certain offenses that are currently considered to be nonviolent. It would also authorize certain crimes that are currently classified as only misdemeanors to be well, I guess it's called upgraded in the criminal world, but it would change them to felony sentences for their certain offenses. So some of those include things like, for instance, with shoplifting. Currently, if there is a theft that is in the $250 to $950 range, that would be considered a misdemeanor. That would be changed to a felony conviction where a person could be sentenced to up to 3 years in county jail for that. It would also limit access to parole programs for certain crimes that right now folks that have what's considered a nonviolent offense would have access to those parole programs. They would no longer be eligible to be in those programs, which also means they would not be eligible for release for parole because there's not a program that they could be placed in. The other one that's I consider to be pretty big on this one is it also requires that folks that are convicted of specified misdemeanors, including things like shoplifting, so in the shoplifting up to $250 category, they would be required to submit DNA samples for a state-run database for any conviction that falls in that category. So with this one, there is a lot of money in the yes column, but more in the no column. I think it's important to just kind of give you the context of where people are sitting with this one. So the yes supporters include the law enforcement groups, the District Attorney Professional Association, as well as various chambers of commerce. The no supporters here include the ACLU, the Teachers Union, probation officers, public defenders, and PICO California is also on the no column here, because what this is saying is this would require more people to be sent to incarceration for what are currently considered fairly petty crimes, and for folks that are in for these sorts of crimes or for nonviolent offenses, they would be required to stay in incarceration longer, whereas previously they would be eligible for some rehabilitation programs. And then that last bullet looks innocuous, but is a really big deal of the DNA samples, because once that DNA sample is in that state database, that's the sort of thing that you can never get it back. You can't squelch that information. So the state is always going to have access to that DNA sample, which means that anytime they're running any sort of investigation, that person's DNA would be in the pool that the state would be able to consider for that. So with that, on to 21.
All right, Proposition 21 has to do with rent control. One of the things, I think that this is a good time to sort of touch us back to those intentions that we articulated and that we set when we were creating this space together earlier tonight. One of the recurring themes in those intentions was around love, it was around compassion, it was around consideration. And I will ask us to keep those things in mind. My charge here is to be nonpartisan, and so I am going to honor that charge. I'm showing up in this space with integrity in that way, so I won't be telling you what to vote for or how to vote, but I do think that it is within our purview to ask you to consider critically the ways in which some of these measures are acted out on the bodies and in the lived experiences of the people that you love. What does love require? All right, rent control. This is an initiative statute, which means that this proposition is on the ballot because people collected enough signatures to get Proposition 21 on the ballot. What this would do is the bottom line is it expands rent control capabilities for cities and counties, basically for local governments. The specific ways that it would do that is it would change the current state rent control law to allow cities and counties to establish rent control on residential properties that are 15 or more years old. It would also allow local limits on rent controls or rent increases, excuse me, to be different from the state limits. So California state has a rent control statute that was enacted. And so this would allow some play within that rent control statute. It would allow rent increases of up to 15% over the course of 3 years in rent controlled properties when a new renter moves in. Some things to consider. It would not apply to landlords who own 2 homes or less. It requires that landlords be able to make what is called a fair rate of return, right? So not requiring somebody to lose money on their property. The thing to know about this is that courts in California have already decided this, right? So this would be codifying in statute, this part, the landlords being able to make a fair rate of return, that represents codifying in statute what already exists in case law. And just some notes about what the current state rent control law is. This is the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, called Costa-Hawkins for short. It does three important things. One, rent control cannot apply to single family homes. Rent control cannot apply to housing built since 1995. And rent control ordinances or laws cannot say how much can be charged to a new renter moving in. So you can see that what is proposed in Proposition 21, Proposition 21 is allowing some play in that Contra-Hawkins framework. Resources are here, as they will be for every measure. And yeah, I think this one is, I hesitate to call any of these straightforward because frankly, they're not, but how you feel about rent control is going to govern how you feel about this and how you vote about this. Proposition 22.
Sorry, bad mute button management there. So Proposition 22 is about rideshare and delivery drivers. And I am sure that you have heard something about this if you have had your television on for even 5 good minutes in the last 2 to 3 weeks, because this one is everywhere. So it is an initiative statute that was placed on the ballot by petition signatures. And what this is about is allowing app-based drivers for services like the Lyft, the Ubers, the delivery services as well. So your DoorDashes, Instacarts, everything of that ilk, to allow them to be reclassified as independent contractors instead of employees, which would have some bearing on their compensation and certain benefits that they are allowed to get. So this is another one that you have seen something about this before, and now we're revisiting it a little bit. And so the background for why this is on our ballot is that last year, the state passed a law that's known as AB 5, which changed the classification for a lot of workers that were previously considered independent contractors, particularly around the gig economy. And it changed the classification for quite a few of those folks from independent contractors to employees. And so with this, it is asking for a specific carve out for these app-based drivers to get them reclassified back to independent contractors so that the companies like Lyft, Uber, and these delivery companies won't have to hire all of those drivers as employees. Now, one of the benefits that those drivers picked up when they got classified as employees are some of the things that are traditional to what most of us are used to, which is when you are employed in a company that is of a certain size, you are entitled to certain benefits, the medical care benefits, sick leave benefits, some of the benefits that you have around your minimum wage protections as well. And so what the drivers of these companies, many of them are saying, we'd prefer to be independent contractors because that allows us to have more flexibility about how and when we work. And so the exchange that's being presented by way of Proposition 22 is to allow those drivers to be reclassified as independent contractors again. And it would then require those companies to provide for those drivers in some other ways that will supplement them that still looks a little bit different than what we would consider traditional employee benefits. So some of those supplements that the company would have to offer would be that they would be required to pay those delivery drivers 20% more than the local minimum wage for the time that they spend driving. They would also have to help pay for health insurance costs for those contractors if they drive more than 15 hours per week, and they would have to pay medical costs if that driver was injured while driving, while working, which can be a distinction for some of them. It would also prevent some of the local jurisdictions from being able to put in their own rules so that we would have a statewide plan across the board. The other way of going about this, if those drivers were considered to be employees, would mean that the company would dictate how and when they would drive. The company would have to set their schedule, and then the company would also have to pay the benefits for them, but they could limit how much they make to just minimum wage there. So as you can imagine, those are two very different scenarios. And so this one is one that I think really does fit in that lens that Jill presented of what does love require, because this one has a lot of money on both sides of this thing. A sense of kind of where it falls, the folks on the yes column are like kind of run down the list of every delivery company that you have ever heard of or seen a commercial for. Pretty much all of them fall on the yes column here. On the no column, you have a lot of labor and employment groups who are looking out to make sure that those drivers have the protections that they need. And then where you have it kind of running on both sides are the folks that are actually driving for these companies. So this may be thinking about some of those intentions that were said and how do I want to vote on some of these things for the people that would be impacted for them as though it were me. Talk to the people in your life, in your world. I'm sure that all of us can identify at least one or two people that either do drive for one of these companies or has at some point in the last couple of years to maybe pick up some extra money or as their full-time job. Talk to them and actually ask them so that you can be critical in your thought process of what does this look like for a person who this is the reality that they're working within. 23.
All right. Proposition 23. Before we start talking about this one, I just want to say thank you all for your continued attention. As Alicia is talking, I'm scrolling through the thumbnails and I can see you all. I see you taking notes. I see you looking intently. I see some of you who are sitting together. I see you having conversations, and this is inspiring to me. It is reassuring to me, it is very easy for the entire world to feel like one great big old dumpster fire right now. And in some places where we live, there are literal fires, right? So it's even easier for that analogy to feel real. And you all showing up and dialing in this way is, it is capacity giving. Right? It is creating bandwidth for me. So I am grateful for you as a way of taking care of ourselves as we're doing this. I'm going to ask you to just check in with yourself really quickly. Check in with your shoulders. If they're hunched up, unhunch them. Check in with your jaw. If your jaw is clenched, unclench it. Ask your tongue what it is doing. If it is stuck at the roof of your mouth, unstick it. When was the last time you had a sip of water? If it's been a minute, sip something. All right, Proposition 23. This proposition is an initiative statute put on the ballot by voters using that initiative signature process, and this is about kidney dialysis clinics. Here's what it says. Y'all folks are fighting about this. Here's what it says. It requires at least one licensed physician to be on site during treatment at dialysis clinics, and there are exemptions available for when there are shortages of qualified licensed physicians. It requires dialysis clinics to report infection data to state and federal governments regularly. It requires state approval to close a dialysis clinic or to drastically reduce services at a dialysis clinic. And it prohibits, that means it makes it unlawful for a clinic to refuse to treat patients based on what type of insurance a patient has, their ability to pay, or even whether they have insurance. Okay, let's talk about some things to consider here. First, what is dialysis? Because I don't want to assume that everybody actually knows what that is. Dialysis is a medical treatment that takes over the kidney's functions when the kidneys are compromised. Okay, if you've ever heard of somebody having kidney failure, or a number of us have been in caregiving roles where this was an issue, the dialysis treatment basically helps to remove toxins from the bodies, which is what the kidneys do, excuse me, when the kidneys are compromised or have failed. Most dialysis treatments in California are performed at outpatient clinics. This is not usually something that somebody is admitted to a hospital to do, because this is an ongoing function, right? Current federal guidelines require that a dialysis patient's treating doctor, so their own doctor, has to visit the patient during dialysis treatment. So while that person is actually receiving a dialysis treatment, at least once per month. Each clinic has to have a board certified doctor on staff. So we're not talking about the dialysis patient's doctor. The clinic itself has to have a board certified doctor on staff. However, the federal regulations do not say how much time the clinic doctor has to spend at the clinic. And so, you know, some studies have been done. When you go to the detailed measure information, you'll see some of this that you know, some of the clinic doctors, they equate that role to about 1/4 of a full-time position. So what we're so the natural question that comes up for me is, who's running the dialysis? I mean, we got all of these medical procedures happening. Who is running the medical procedures if the medical personnel are not there? Now, of course, there are nurses are highly trained and highly skilled medical professionals. But ask any nurse, and they'll tell you that a doctor will tell them quickly that a nurse is not a doctor. Okay, and so another contextual thing to keep in mind here is that there are 2 companies in the state of California that own or operate the majority of the dialysis clinics. You will see, I mean, you've seen their signs, and if you haven't, then you'll notice them after tonight. DaVita is one of them, and Fresenius Medical Care is another one. And their majority accounts for, I think, maybe close to 3/4 or perhaps even more than 3/4 of the dialysis clinics. This is one for which a lot of money has been spent. A reported $6.2 million has been spent from sources in favor of the measure. And again, in favor of the measure means yes to these requirements, yes to at least one licensed physician on site, yes to reporting infection data, yes to state approval to close a dialysis clinic or to reduce services, and yes to prohibiting or making it unlawful to refuse somebody treatment at a dialysis clinic based on their ability to pay or how they're paying. So $6.2 million from the in favor folks. 93, yes, 93, comma, digit, comma, digit, right? $93 million from sources against this measure. Now listen, it is a natural question. Like, this isn't even a Sherlock Holmes question. Why so much money? And in particular, why such a disparity in the amounts spent? I don't have an answer for that question for you, but I'm asking it. And I'm encouraging you to ask it as well as you continue your research on this measure. Some things that people are concerned about are dialysis clinics closing down because they can't meet these requirements. You know, some folks say there are already federal regulations. Dialysis is, you know, it's already heavily regulated, and so on. But here's this information. All right, take this and use it to help guide you as you formulate the rest of your questions. Hopefully some of this makes you curious as you inform your vote. All right, Proposition 24. So know that Proposition 24 and Proposition 25 are the last two state ballot measures, I do believe. And then there are just those couple of county measures that Alicia's gonna go over, and then we will close you out of this part of the presentation. Thank you so much for staying with us. Yeah. All right, Proposition 22.
4.
Oh, sorry, 24, sorry. Good Lord.
Now you were reading my mind about the backwards of it all, because on Proposition 23, just one other note as you were looking up information, that is one that you are revisiting something that you have seen before. So as you are looking things up, just be mindful of the time frame, and that historical context may be helpful for you, because the kidney dialysis clinic measure was on our last ballot, and there was a whole bunch of money in it that time too. So sometimes looking at what the conversation was last time and what happened can help with kind of framing, why are we seeing this again, and why is there that's almost $1 billion, y'all, on one ballot measure. Something about that alone makes you say, let me tune in. Somebody's trying to do something here, and I need to know.
Thank you so much for adding that piece of context, Alicia. That's true, and it's really important. Thank you.
Absolutely. On Proposition 24, this is one that's about a change in consumer privacy laws, and this is another one where pay attention to the money, because following the money can really be instructive. So this is another initiative statute that was placed by petition signatures, and what it does is amend the current consumer privacy laws that were just recently changed in 2018. So what this would allow is consumers to prevent businesses from sharing their personal information, to get inaccurate information either pulled down or corrected, and limit how those businesses can use information that's been classified as sensitive personal information. It also establishes a government enforcement wing called the Privacy Protection Agency. So the background context for this particular provision: in 2018, we passed a stricter consumer privacy law that allowed our standards to essentially match something that's very similar to what they use in the European standard for privacy, and controlled what companies were allowed to have and how they were allowed to use it and how they were allowed to share it. Excuse me, with Proposition 24, what it's doing is expanding some of those protections to allow it to be easier for consumers to either opt in or out of what information is collected and how it can be shared. Then some of the other notes to know about it is what it does is it allows companies to charge different amounts for how and when certain pieces of data are used, either in the pulling down or of the who they are sharing it to. And so some of those data sets that get premium treatment on the dollars are going to be things like loyalty and reward programs that you might participate in with various companies. Then one of the other big pieces around Proposition 24 is it would authorize $10 million from the state's general fund to create a government enforcement agency that would be charged with dealing with violations that companies are charging for this consumer process. So a thing to note is it authorizes $10 million to get it started, but it doesn't have any provision for the how and when this continues and when it gets new funding sources. Now, when I said follow the money, a couple of things. That $10 million is something to pay attention to. Another thing is that this one has $5.54 million that has been spent on the Yes campaign. One real estate developer is responsible for $5.53 million of that. So all but about $11,000 of it has come from a single person. And that same person is the one who almost single-handedly funded the 2018 law. And with that 2018 law, he funded the petition collection process. And then when he had enough to get it on the ballot, made a deal with the legislature to craft exactly how that was going to be presented to everyone. So this one is one that, something that we haven't said in this presentation, but I know that we've said it in prior ones. So if you've ever done one of these talks with us, one of the things we talk to you about is it can also instruct your vote if you just don't understand the law, if it doesn't make sense. And this one is one that I urge you to look at it for yourself, because all these protections and what we've got going on here is about 54 pages. And I will tell you that I consider myself to be a fairly smart person. I understand a lot of complex things and explain them to a lot of people. I had a very hard time figuring out what this was and what it was all about. But what stood out to me is one person is putting a whole bunch of money on the line for this thing. So I leave you with that and say on to 25.
Proposition 25. This is yes or no on getting rid of the cash bail system, but it may or may not be as simple as that. So let's talk about it. This is one that has come up. It has come up before and it is currently up. This one is a referendum. And this is the first referendum that we've seen in this set of measures. So let me just explain what has happened here. The California legislature passed a bill in 2018. It was called Senate Bill 10. That's just how they number these things. It's something that starts in the Senate will be Senate bill. Something that starts in the Assembly will be Assembly bill, and they have numbers. So the legislature passed Senate Bill 10 in 2018 to do what this proposition says do, what the yes part of this proposition says do, okay? The Senate bill did not go into effect because of this referendum. A referendum is basically when, those of you who have children, When you told your child, no, you cannot have the ice cream as your dinner on tonight, and the child goes to their other parent and says, can I have the ice cream for my dinner on tonight? That child just tried to get a referendum. Okay, it is a decision about the enactment of a decision, okay, whether or not we're going to do this thing. So the purpose of Proposition 25 is to decide whether that Senate bill goes into effect. So the question is, what does the Senate bill say? Here we go. The Senate bill, it calls for a yes or no vote on replacing the cash or money bail system with a system that determines pretrial release of people who have been accused of crimes based on whether or not they are a public safety risk, or those people represent a public safety risk or a flight risk. It also would limit pretrial detention of people who are accused of most types of misdemeanors. This only applies when somebody is accused of a crime, but there has been no trial to determine whether or not they're guilty. Okay, that's the only time that bail is even relevant. Okay, so the state has said that Jill did something illegal, right? Jill has been charged with a crime. Wait a minute, I'm not burning that bread. I'm gonna have to burn a candle in here or something after saying that. But anyway, a person has been accused of a crime, but there hasn't been a trial yet. Part of the purpose, part of the stated purpose of bail, I think that's an important distinction. Part of the stated purpose of bail is to ensure that the person who has been accused of the crime will actually show up to court for the trial. All right, so how do we do that now? We can take their word for it, right? I'll be here, and a judge or a court can release them sort of on their own recognizance. They can pay or post a bail. So cash or money bail is an amount of money that the accused person can pay, right? So that they will, so that the court will have security that they will be present for trial. Or they can be held in jail pending a trial. So a person who is accused of a crime but has not been convicted of anything can be held in jail, right, until their trial date comes as security, essentially, so that they will show up for the trial date, or if the court believes that they are some sort of a risk to public safety. The accused person does not get to determine how much their bail will be. That is a court decision. If Proposition 25 passes to enact this Senate bill, which would end cash bail, then what'll happen is a judge will still get to decide if a person is held in jail while their trial date is approaching. The judge will decide based on whether the person poses a high risk, a medium risk, or a low risk for flight or for danger to public safety. If a person poses a low risk, then they are not held and there is no bail, right? Because this proposition would get rid of cash bail. So if the person is determined to be a low risk, then they are not held. They will just come back for their trial date. If a person is a high risk, then they will be held. If a person is determined by a court to be a medium risk, then it could go either way. So if a person is determined to be a high risk, they will be held and they will have an opportunity to sort of plead their case to a judge to say, no, you should really let me, you should really not hold me. You can decide for yourself what your level of confidence is on that. But that's not the part that is under consideration for this proposition. I don't believe that that is the thing that's going to make your decision on your vote here, because a judge already gets to decide that part, right? So deciding whether or not a person is held pending trial, is a judge will still get to do that. That's the part that I'm trying to communicate. The question is whether or not there will be cash bail in order to avoid being held. So this is about removing the cash from the equation. So this one, there's quite a bit of money spent here. It might not seem like a lot based on some of the other numbers that we talked about. There's certainly not 90-something million dollars, excuse me, spent here. There's about $8 million, $8.5 million reported on the yes side, and about $6 million reported on the no side. So like I said, that might not seem like a whole lot of money. The reason I'm bringing it to your attention is because of who spent the money. Contributions, so there's some out-of-state money that's involved here, but also I thought it was really interesting that the percentage of contributions from individuals on the yes side, so yes to end cash bail, was about 84%. So individual folks represent that. What number did I give you? $8.5 million. On the no side, no, do not end cash bail. Organizations and institutions represent 95% of that $6.5 million. So here, I think the interesting thing is who spent the money, not necessarily how much of the money was spent, because it's almost equal on both sides. So do you get to buy your way out of the, do you get to buy your way out of being held in jail pending your trial date, if you have access to that money, or do we just remove cash from the consideration? So that's what's happening here. As a person who practices in court, I will tell you that all of the California courts are affected by COVID. And so I think that this also has a particular time relevance, right? Just as a practical matter, people who are accused of crimes are constitutionally entitled to what is called a speedy trial. How that works out in practice it can sometimes put a different definition on speedy than you or I might consider it. And so there are some other practical considerations that are at work here. So again, what does love require as you are considering all of these measures? Because in the end, institutional ideas and systematic ideas come to bear on the lives of people. And you are a people. I am a people. You love a people, right? I love a people. So, so that's the end of the state propositions. Alicia is going to whip through really quickly these county measures, and then I promise we will let you fly and be free. Thank you so much for continuing to be attentive here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we
Good job, good job, good job.
Thank you. We have 2 Alameda measures and 1 Contra Costa, but I am going to borrow a note from Brother Malcolm here and combine an Alameda and a Contra Costa measure. Even though they are different counties, they are very similar measures. And so I can say it once and just give you the contrast, and whichever county you fall in, that's going to help you. So it is Alameda measure W and Contra Costa measure X. for both of those, they are sales tax measures. And what is being proposed is a sales tax increase of 0.5%. The distinction is for how long. Alameda, it's 10 years. Contra Costa, it is 20 years. And with this money, what they would be doing is with this 0.5%, it would be used for essential county services like mental health services, job training, and social safety net programming on the Alameda side. On the Contra Costa side, they've really earmarked it for hospitals, fire and emergency response, and crucial safety, safety net and child services. For both of them, they have a fiscal accountability piece that is baked into the sales tax measure that would authorize information being reported out to the community members for how and when this money is spent, and the anticipated amount that they expect these to generate on the Alameda side, $150 million annually. On the Contra Costa side, it is $81 million annually. So I told you I could do those super fast. So those are the two for those measures. And so then that leaves the last one is Alameda Measure V as in victory. And with this one, it is another one that is a revisit of something that you have seen before. And what this is currently there is a utility users tax that is already charged on folks that use utilities but live in an unincorporated area of Alameda County. So specifically, those unincorporated areas of Alameda County are going to be Ashland, Castro Valley, Cherryland, Fairview, San Lorenzo, and Sunol. Those are areas that are not part of the various cities that we have. So this is not Berkeley, not Oakland, not Alameda, not Hayward, none of the cities, just those unincorporated areas. With this measure, what it would allow for is an extension of this utility user tax to extend to 2033. Currently set to sunset next year, it would extend that to 2033 and would provide approximately $12 million annually to provide those various county services and extend those into those unincorporated areas. And with that, that takes us, I told you I could do those really fast. And so that takes us through all of the state and county measures. And so what you see here is these are all of the resources that are going to give you information for any of these. What our hope is obviously in this amount of time with this many measures, we can't give you all of the nitty gritty for every single one of these, but to at least get you kind of in the right mind space so that for some of them, it might be a quick hit, yes or no, you know which way you're leaning. Or if you need more information than each of these resources, I will tell you candidly, these are ones that we use for ourselves and in preparing for you. So these are all resources that we vouch for that are going to help you with your ballot information. They are also going to help you with candidate information. So as you're getting into your ballot and are looking up the specifics for the people that are on your ballots, that both Voters Edge and Ballotopedia are going to give you information for those folks that are there so that you can just make your decisions there so that you can help us all be in the future with a legacy intact because we are going to be informed voters. We thank you so much for your attention and your patience in going through all of this, and thank the Social Justice Ministry team for the opportunity to present this all to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is our absolute pleasure. It is our honor, our humble honor that you would entrust us with this and that you would entrust us with your time on it. One thing that I do want to call your attention to here is this link about information for same-day voter registration. Hopefully, oh goodness, what did I do? Okay, hopefully everybody is already registered to vote. If you are not already registered to vote, hopefully you will be taking care of that. AS and also AP. If for some reason you are not, if for some reason somebody is a latecomer to the voter registration table, it is not too late. There is information for how to do same-day voter registration. I will caution you that this is conditional, so it is not a substitute for registering to vote, so please don't let anybody think that it is. But it is meant to be a fail-safe. And then also, your county elections offices are going to be accessible here, so that if you are not a mailing ballot person and you want to go drop it off, that information is there. And then I promised you that there would be a link for the League of Women Voters, who's also multiple of their chapters are doing deep dives on these measures, so that you can look up time and space to get more information if you need. These are the defined terms that I promised you are there, and then how to reach us. If you have follow-up questions or need to talk to us about something that we do in our day-to-day practice, you can schedule an appointment with us. We live stream every Wednesday on YouTube at 12:30 Pacific time, and that live stream is a place for questions and answers. As well, we address those in real time, and the young people have put us on Instagram, so we are also there. Thanks, y'all. I'm gonna stop the share now and turn it back over to the Social Justice Ministries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jill and Alicia. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. Thank you for informing us, equipping us, and inspiring us to make the right decisions when we go vote on November 3rd. Now we're going to go through the faith votes. So Marcel, if you want to start it off, that would be great. Are you there, Marcel?
Sorry, y'all. I was just talking a whole lot to myself, not being properly unmuted. So let me start over again. If you recall, at the top of our evening, Saran mentioned that Imani Community Church is a member of Faith in Action East Bay, and by extension, Pico, California. Pico, California has published a Faith Votes Guide, and the link for that will be posted in the chat in just a few seconds. You have already heard many of the details regarding these propositions, and we want to give you some information about how Pico, California and Faith in Action is pushing us to vote. We are voting yes on Prop 15 because it'll bring $12 billion annually back into our schools and communities.
We are voting yes on Proposition 16 because it will overturn 25 years of restriction on affirmative action in California.
We are voting yes on Proposition 17 because this will restore the right to vote for the 50,000 plus people who were convicted of a felony or are on parole. This follows the footsteps of a Florida initiative that was passed by voters in 2016.
Now, we are voting no on Proposition 20. This will overturn the work we have thousands of spiritual leaders who helped pass Proposition 47, 57. Prop 47 and 57 reforms give adults who have committed nonviolent crimes a second chance. Remember that it's no on Proposition 20.
We are voting yes on Proposition 21. It will overturn a restriction in California that limits the ability of local governments to reenact rent control.
And we're voting yes on Proposition 20. It's all in the money bill. This affirms a bill that was passed in 2018 that removed the cash bail system and profiting petrol detention. The bill expedites appeals, prohibits the requirement of payment of other defendant fees, and more.
For more information on these propositions and our Faith Votes Guide, the link to the website is in the chat.
Now, we are going to ask you to complete a quick survey. The survey results are private and you can opt out of responding to any questions. So this is the time that we're going to ask for a commitment. We're going to pump you up, we're ready, and we're asking, what can you do during this time? I just created a Google, so the Google Doc is in the chat box. Just fill it out and it will let us know. Thank you. So we're at the last end, and I am going to introduce the powerhouse. Behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, Ms. Sloan.
Wow, I just wanted to start with saying what a beautiful presentation that we've had today. Thank you guys so much for staying on for this presentation. I want to pull up my notes because I want to make sure not to forget anybody, because we had a slew of folks that spent some time on this. So I want to thank you guys once again for sharing, for staying on for this full duration of this call. Special thank you to Jill and Alicia for breaking it down the way they broke it down. I needed that. I'm sure other folks on this call needed that. Super thankful that you guys were able to spend so much time in preparation for this. I don't know how much time you prepared it took you, but I think that slide deck took a while, and I hope that I can have it. So hopefully we get that slide deck shared with us. I also want to take a second to thank the Social Justice Ministry, and then a special thanks to our hosts, Marcel and Saran, that really held it down very well as hosts. And lastly, but not leastly, I want to tip my hat to our ministerial staff, because without Rev, we couldn't do this. Without him paving the way and making sure that we have space to have social justice moments in our everyday sermons, we wouldn't have this church. So I want to thank you, Rev, for all that you always do. And I want to thank you, Minister, our Executive Minister, Reverend Dr. Ron H. Sims, who started us off. And once again, thank you for joining us for our third town hall. This is not going to be our last town hall. You guys, we have a duty right now. We have to make sure we get our folks out there. This is not I know you guys watched that debate last night. We are in a fight, and we need to arm our folks. Thank you, Jill, for arming us with the information. Thank you, Alicia, for arming us with the information. And now it is time for us to stand up and celebrate. All right, because as you know, this is movement of the people. So we don't like to end it with everybody sitting down. It's time for us to stand up and celebrate. I believe a DJ somewhere is going to add some music in this in between. And let's celebrate on the way out. Thank you again, guys, for joining us. I'll see you next go round. Come on, DJ, let's get it. DJ.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sloan.
DJ is on her way. She's on her way.
Oh, great.
I can get
Thank you. What's this?
You guys hear that?
No, we can't hear it, but he's really dancing. So y'all can dance with the man that's dancing. Let's go on and celebrate this time.
You hear that?
Here we go. We can hear it, Jay.
Oh yes,
Thank you guys. Thank you for joining us.
Fellow members.
See us on the next one. Oh, and if you haven't made our phone day parties, you guys are missing out. We're having a great hour of power every Tuesday. You can join us right here, same that time, same that channel. And we're going to be phone back in our community to make